The Sith Lord lay dying on the command deck of the Starforge. The Jedi standing over him had once been his closest friend. With his final breath, Malak admitted that the Jedi path held more truth than he had ever been willing to believe. Revan had once been his master, his greatest rival, and the architect of the Sith Empire now crumbling around them. He had worn both robes in his lifetime. He had been a Jedi Knight, a conqueror who nearly ended the Republic, a man stripped of his own memory, and a redeemed knight again. By the time Malak fell, Revan had already reached a verdict on the Jedi and the Sith. Neither order would have welcomed what he had to say. His verdict took shape across 4,000 years of Sith history, his own crossing from light to dark and back, and 300 years spent inside the mind of one of the most powerful dark side users the galaxy had ever produced. Revan never laid it out in a single speech. Most of that journey lives in the Old Legends continuity, across Knights of the Old Republic, its sequel, the Revan novel, and the Old Republic. Canon barely touches Revan at all, which is its own kind of evidence for what the Jedi Order decided was worth remembering. His journey through both sides of the Force traces the answer step by step, and it begins with how the man standing on that command deck earned the right to be there. The man who heard that confession had once built a weapon with no conscience at all. Revan trained under several Jedi Masters, including the woman who would later become Darth Kreia. He was already a Jedi Knight when the Mandalorians overran the planet KOTOR and pushed deep into Republic space. And when the Jedi Council ordered the Order to stand aside, he refused. He led a group of defiant Jedi called the Revanchists into the war, rose to Supreme Commander of the Republic military, and personally defeated Mandalore the Ultimate at the Battle of Malachor V in 3960 BBY. His victories carried weight that went beyond the battlefield. The battle plan he laid out at Malachor triggered the Mass Shadow Generator, a super weapon that tore open a wound in the Force so deep it would haunt Meetra Surik, the Jedi Exile, throughout Knights of the Old Republic too. He also built HK-47, a hunter-killer droid designed to eliminate living targets without moral limits, a tool that would outlive its creator by centuries. The Jedi who would later defend his old order had already done dark side work long before he officially fell. And then, he became the very thing he had gone to war against. Chasing traces of Sith influence into the unknown regions, Revan and Malak discovered the rebuilt Sith Empire of Vitiate on Dromund Kaas. Vitiate bent them both to his will, and they returned to Republic space as Sith Lords. By the end of the Jedi Civil War in 3956 BBY, Revan's own apprentice had turned on him, firing on his flagship during a Jedi boarding action led by Bastila Shan. The Council captured what was left of him, rewrote his mind, and sent him out with no memory to find the Starforge, an ancient Rakatan factory that could build infinite warships and had been the engine Revan and Malak used to flood the Republic with fleets. He found it, defeated Malak, and chose the light. In the new Essential chronology, that light side ending is the one treated as canonical. Revan's first proof came from the woman who saved his life. Bastila fell to the dark side after Malak captured and broke her. She served the Sith as a battle meditator, projecting fear and confusion into enemy forces, making her one of the most valuable weapons in the war. Revan brought her back to the light on the summit of the Leon Temple, and she came back more powerful than before, not weaker. In the final battle, her meditation helped the Republic fleet bring down the Starforge. The dark side had only borrowed her strength, and the light gave it back freely. That difference is the first sign of how deep the gap between the two paths actually runs. Revan's claim hinges on the word true. Without it, his position is just another Padawan's boast. With it, he's saying that some Jedi fall short, and that the dark side never measures up at all. Kreia had been one of Revan's earliest masters, exiled from the Jedi Order before her fall, and she would later return as the Sith Lord, Darth Treya. She gave that word its full weight in Knights of the Old Republic too. She used the phrase to describe the followers of Meetra Surik, calling them the Lost Jedi. They earned that title not because they followed the code perfectly, but because they had watched their certainties break apart and still chose to do the work. Kreia also reflected that Revan may never have truly fallen at all, and that the line between a fall and a willing sacrifice is almost impossible to see clearly. She herself would have rejected the conclusion that the Jedi are stronger, insisting that the Force itself was the cage and both sides were its prisoners. Her own final moments would complicate that position. The clearest proof of what that definition means walked out of the Shadowlands of Kashyyyk. Jolee Bindo had already lived the test Revan would later define. Rebellion, decades before the Mandalorian Wars ever began. In his younger years, he defied the Council to run supplies past a blockade on the planet Ukatis, fell in love with a woman caught up in the conflict since she was Force-sensitive, married her, and trained her in secret. When the Great Sith War broke out, she was drawn to Exar Kun's Brotherhood of the Sith and tried to pull Jolee with her. He refused, and the duel that followed lasted long and nearly killed them both. Jolee won and disarmed her, but cannot bring himself to strike the killing blow. She escaped, joined Kun's forces, and killed many Jedi before falling in the final battles of the war in 3996 BBY. What the Council did next was the opposite of what anyone would expect. They cleared Jolee and planned to promote him to Jedi Knight. That mercy broke him, because in his own eyes, he was responsible for every Jedi his wife went on to kill, and the Council's forgiveness felt like an institution hiding behind procedure instead of facing what had happened. Decades of pain taught Jolee what Atris never learned. He rejected the promotion, walked away from the Order, and spent decades in self-imposed exile deep in the Shadowlands. His quarrel with the Council was never that it had been too harsh, but that it had been too comfortable, too willing to look away. On the opposite end, Atris proved that avoiding the dark side is not the same as defeating it. She was a Jedi Master, a loud champion of purity, and the leading voice calling for Meetra Surik's exile. She built a hidden academy on Telos with a secret chamber filled with Sith holocrons she studied alone for years, convinced she could handle them without being changed. By the end of the game, the holocrons had already won, and she had fallen without recognizing it. The true Jedi in Revan's framework is the person who encounters the dark side and chooses not to stay. Jolee earned that title through a lifetime of pain, Bastila earned it late and came back stronger for the breaking, and the man who built HK-47, a droid with no moral limits, earned it twice. Atris refused the test entirely and fell without realizing it. Revan understood what the Sith Code promises because he had lived under it. He had commanded armies under its logic and watched Malak turn his own flagship's guns against him because that code demanded it. He knew the promise well, that passion brings strength, strength brings power, power brings victory, and that victory will somehow set the Sith free. Every apprentice who falls to the dark side believes that promise, but from both sides, Revan had seen that the Sith's core promise is hollow. The dark side is not the reward, but the bait sitting in front of it. The only way to reach the real prize is to walk through that temptation and come out the other side without keeping any of what it offered. The Sith grab what is offered and call it victory. The true Jedi walks past. The difference between them comes down to something the Sith never account for: cost. Light side power flows with the natural current of the Force, the way water moves through a riverbed. Dark side power fights upstream, forcing the Force into a container and calling that strength. In a single duel, the difference is invisible. Across a lifetime, the toll becomes staggering, and every example of that toll has a name. One Sith Lord paid that toll so completely that he forgot he was ever a man. In 3952 BBY, 4 years after the fall of the Starforge, the Jedi Order was still bleeding from the wars Revan had started and ended. Atris secretly called a gathering of Jedi on the Miraluka colony world of KOTOR, and nearly every surviving Jedi came. What arrived at KOTOR was Darth Nihilus. He did not land an army or fire weapons. He simply descended on the planet and ripped the Force from its surface, devouring every Jedi, every creature, and every living thing in a single stroke. One being survived, a Miraluka named Visas Mar, who carried the wound KOTOR carved into her for the rest of her life. That same rupture at Malachor had left behind a hunger with no identity. Nihilus wore a mask because without the Force constantly pouring into him, he would dissolve. Even after draining an entire world, his appetite returned almost immediately, and by the time Meetra Surik confronted him above Telos, only the hunger remained. Nihilus was not the only one paying that price. Darth Sion, another member of the Sith Triumvirate, held his shattered body together through nothing but pain and hatred. He could not die, but he could not truly live either. When Meetra Surik finally convinced him to release his hold on the dark side, he fell apart the moment he let go. Two Sith Lords shaped by the same war, and neither one could stand without the dark side holding them up. Meetra Surik herself was shaped by the same wound at Malachor, but her response was the opposite. When the mass shadow generator fired and thousands winked out at once, the trauma forced her to survive by cutting herself off from the Force entirely. Something she did without realizing it, and something no Sith could ever do, because their strength depends on constant feeding. Kreia would later call her a wound in the Force made flesh. Where Nihilus became a void that consumed everything around him, Surik became proof that a Jedi could let go of the Force and still survive. That difference runs straight to the heart of Revan's argument. Across all of Legends, every major darkside survival method ends the same way. The Tales of the Jedi series has Nagasato sealed in a tomb on Yavin 4 for centuries, and Frida Nat's spirit still clinging to the moon Duxon long after his body was gone. Exar Kun bound himself to the Massassi temples of Yavin 4 at the end of the Great Sith War, draining the entire Massassi population to fuel the binding, and spent 4,000 years trapped on a single moon. In the Legend storyline Dark Empire, Sidious survived the second Death Star by transferring his consciousness into clone bodies on Biss, but each new clone degraded faster than the last until he ran out of viable hosts. Every one of those methods requires something outside the self to hold the user together: a tomb, a holocron, a host body, a vault of clones. The Jedi of comparable power needed none of it. Yoda passed peacefully on Dagobah and merged with the larger Force. Qui-Gon Jinn discovered a way to preserve his awareness within the Force itself after death. Not a survival trick, but a way of becoming part of something greater. And he later taught the technique to Yoda and Obi-Wan. None of it cost them anything. The light side draws from something bigger than the self, while the dark side walls the Force up inside the ego and calls it strength. Hoarding needs a vault, and the Sith obsession with survival grows out of the same trap. Their strength cannot exist without a self to hold it. Lose the self, and everything built on it is gone. The largest toll in galactic history was paid on the opposite side of that castle, on a planet called Nathema. The emperor that Revan would one day face began as a child on a world then called Medrias, born in 5113 BBY as Tenebrae. By age 10, he had stripped his own father's connection to the Force. By 13, he had conquered his entire home world. It was not a prodigy, but something far more dangerous. Mark Aragnos gave him the title Lord Vitiate, and Tenebrae renamed the planet Nathema and spent the next century alone, studying the dark side in isolation. Mark Aragnos granted him the title Lord Vitiate, and he renamed the planet Nathema, spending the next century studying the dark side in isolation. After the Republic won the Great Hyperspace War in 5000 BBY, Vitiate summoned roughly 8,000 surviving Sith Lords to Nathema under the promise of saving their civilization. He bent all 8,000 to his will and channeled their combined power through a single ritual that lasted days. When it ended, everything on the planet was gone. Every lord, every creature, every plant, every insect, all of it drained to nothing. The ritual was only practice. Vitiate planned to turn that same hunger on the rest of the galaxy one day. In return, Vitiate purchased a form of immortality, a consciousness that could inhabit vessels and reach across light years. He survived more than 1,000 years, built a new empire in the unknown regions, and later, when that borrowed power began to fade, consumed the entire planet Ziost in a single day to keep himself going. His existence from Nathema forward became a constant feeding, and the moment he stopped, he ended. Nihilus swallowed one world, and it barely sustained him. Vitiate drained a world and 8,000 of his own lords to buy a millennium, and still had to keep feeding. The dark side does not just charge more for its power, it charges endlessly. Revan did not arrive at this conclusion through theory. He lived inside it for 300 years. After Malak fell on the Starforge, Revan knew the true threat was still out in the unknown regions, and went back. He returned to Dromund Kaas with Meetra Surik and a Sith Lord named Scourge. Their attempt on Vitiate went badly wrong. Scourge turned on the group mid-strike, cut Surik down, and Vitiate captured Revan alive. The Emperor locked him in a stasis chamber hidden in the Maelstrom Nebula for roughly 300 years. His mind linked directly to Vitiate's own consciousness. 3 centuries in chains, and Revan did not break. That alone sets him apart from almost every other figure in the Legends continuity. 300 years is not a prison term, but a lifetime lived 10 times over, spent inside the mind of one of the most powerful darkside users the galaxy had ever produced, and Revan held on. Vitiate had built the bond to mine Revan's mind for Republic intelligence ahead of his invasion. During those centuries, Revan corrupted the link in the other direction, slowing the Emperor's plans, planting doubts, and holding on to pieces of himself that Vitiate could never reach. He watched Vitiate burn through vessels, manipulate civilizations, and pour the life of worlds into a single mind just to keep that mind alive. He saw the dark side's cost from inside the machine that generates it. When Republic and Imperial strike teams finally freed him, Revan's mind had fractured into a light aspect and a dark aspect, split by 3 centuries of contact with the Emperor's will. Star Wars: The Old Republic's Shadow of Revan expansion eventually made him whole again. His conclusion that the light side is fundamentally stronger than the dark was not a philosophy. It was 300 years of watching the Emperor from the inside. Few others in Legends had seen the Force from that many angles, and fewer still came out the other side, still choosing the light. Thousands of years later, Bane watched another Sith Order tear itself apart and decided betrayal was worth keeping. The final layer of Revan's evidence stretches across 4,000 years and centers on a simple fact: every Sith civilization ever built was destroyed by the very people inside it. After the Brotherhood of Darkness destroyed itself at the 7th Battle of Ruusan in 1000 BBY, Bane survived alone. The Sith Lord Khan had detonated a thought bomb, an ancient Sith ritual preserved in dark side teachings, and the blast consumed his own army along with the Jedi who faced them. Bane took one lesson from that wreckage: if the Sith cannot stop turning on each other, the system should be built around exactly 2 people so that every betrayal would at least produce someone stronger. The Darth Bane trilogy shows that even Bane could not escape the system he designed. When he feared his apprentice Zannah lacked the strength to overthrow him, he tried to transfer his own essence into her body. Her willpower matched his, and the attempt destroyed him. 1,000 years later, Vader killed Sidious, and the cycle completed itself just as Bane had shaped it. The same self-destruction runs through every Sith civilization in Legends without exception. From Exar Kun's Brotherhood collapsing in barely a year, to the Triumvirate turning on each other almost immediately, to the Star Wars: The Old Republic era Sith Empire running on betrayal from start to finish. When a Jedi Master trains a student to surpass them, the Order celebrates. When a Sith Master does the same, the Master sleeps with one eye open for whatever remains of their life. In contrast, the Jedi builds something that no single person needs to survive for it to continue. In her final moments on Malachor 5, Kreia walked Meetra Surik through a vision of the future and told her the Jedi would rebuild. Then, Kreia passed, and a lifetime of refusing to trust either side gave way to something simpler. The Force would go on, the Jedi would go on, and the work would continue past every individual who carried it. The woman who had rejected the very idea that the Jedi are stronger spent her last breath proving what she could no longer deny. Kreia's prediction came true. After the first Jedi Purge in 3951 BBY, Meetra Surik, Bastila Shan, and new Jedi like Atton Rand, Brianna, and Visas Mar rebuilt the Order from almost nothing. When Order 66 reduced the Jedi to Yoda, Obi-Wan, and eventually Luke, Luke rebuilt at the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, the same moon where Exar Kun's spirit had been trapped for 4,000 years. The moon where the Sith went to fade became the place where the Jedi came back. In the Legacy comics, set around 130 ABY in Legends, Krait's one Sith drove the Jedi underground, and once more, the Jedi returned to help bring him down. The Order returns every time because it is a living idea, never a finished one. It falls into the same rigidity, the same mistakes, and the same temptations generation after generation. But the fact that it can be rebuilt at all by anyone willing to carry the teachings forward is the proof. The Sith build empires full of exactly the kind of people who will tear those empires apart from the inside. The Jedi build a philosophy that survives in its own destruction. At their peak, the Sith can do things no Jedi would even attempt. Nihilus hollowed out KOTOR, Vitiate drained Nathema of every living thing, and Sidious called down force storms across star systems. Not one of those feats is denied, but every one came with a price. Bastila's battle meditation could decide an entire fleet engagement, and it cost her nothing. That is the specific reason Malak captured her instead of killing her. At the Battle of Rakata Prime, she projected calm and coordination across an entire fleet, turning losing positions into victories and helping to bring down the Starforge. Republic captains felt her presence as clearly as if she were on the bridge beside them. She sat quietly on a Republic cruiser, breathed deeply, and shaped a fleet-wide outcome through nothing but the Force flowing through her. With no drained whirls, no clone vaults, and no anchors of any kind needed, the Force sustained her freely. The Sith would point out that Bastila's gift was captured and used against the Republic during the war, which only proves the point. The dark side never earned her strength, it only held it until she chose to walk back, and then every piece of it left with her. That is what the gap between the Jedi and the Sith actually means. Not that the Jedi always hit harder in a single duel, but that the Force sustains a Jedi freely, while the dark side takes back from the Sith everything it ever gave. The gap between free and paying forever is not close. Revan, standing over Malak's body, already knew all of this before anyone else ever would. Malak's last words were the first verdict. Revan's choice to walk off into the light was the second. If power means the highlight reel of consumed worlds and shattered fleets, the Sith can win in an afternoon. If power means what is still standing when the great-grandchildren of the great-grandchildren are gone, the Jedi win every single time. 4,000 years after the Starforge fell, every Sith Empire that rose in between is dust. The Jedi Order is still standing, rebuilt again and again by people willing to carry the teachings forward. That is what Kreia meant by the Lost Jedi, the ones who met the dark side directly and refused to stay. By that definition, the true Jedi were always going to outlast the Sith. That is the answer Revan spent every chapter of his life proving.